Have you ever looked in a mirror and felt like something was wrong? Like something or someone was watching you from the other side? Imagine seeing reflections of yourself that shouldn't be there and realizing that you are never alone. This is the story of a young girl who found a cursed mirror, a mirror that belonged to a dark circus. And with each look, a new clown appears, bringing with her secrets that should never be revealed. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us about your stories and where you're watching from. The mirror was never supposed to be hers. It sat forgotten in the back of an old antique shop covered in dust, its golden frame dulled by time. The carved face of a smiling clown at the top of the frame seemed almost welcoming, almost. Sophie ran her fingers over the cold glass, a shiver crawling down her spine. She wasn't even looking for a mirror. But something about this one called to her. The price was ridiculously low, and when she asked the store owner why, the old man simply shrugged. Some things just don't like being owned. She should have left it there, but instead, she took it home. Sophie placed the mirror in her bedroom, leaning it against the wall across from her bed. As she stepped back to admire it, she felt watched. But that was stupid. It was just a mirror. Still, that night, as she lay in bed, she swore she heard something. A soft, distant chuckle. She turned over, heart pounding. The room was still. The mirror reflected her dimly in the moonlight. "Go to sleep, Sophie." She closed her eyes. Then, a creak. Her eyelids flew open. The mirror had moved. Just a little. Just enough to face her directly. Her breath hitched. Had she said it like that? No. No way. She pushed back the unease, told herself she was imagining things, and turned over again. But when she woke up the next morning, she saw something that made her blood run cold. She had fallen asleep with her back to the mirror. But in the reflection, her body was facing it. And worse, she was smiling. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She bolted upright, twisting to look behind her. Her body was exactly where it should be. No eerie smile, no unnatural pose, just her tangled sheets and the cold morning light streaming through the curtains. But the reflection, that wasn't right. She swallowed hard and forced herself to look at the mirror again. Maybe she was still groggy. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. But deep down, a sliver of fear nestled into her chest, refusing to leave. With hesitant steps, she walked up to the mirror. Her reflection copied her, perfectly normal. No creepy smile, no eerie double. Just her. But the moment she turned away, a whisper, too soft to make out the words, but close, right behind her. She spun back, heart hammering. The room was empty. Her gaze locked onto the mirror, scanning it for anything out of place. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A name carved into the golden frame, just below the clown's smiling face. Circo Phantasma. She frowned. Circo, like a circus. The engraving was so faint it was almost invisible, hidden beneath years of grime and neglect. A quick search on her phone brought up almost nothing, except for one article from decades ago. The Circo Phantasma was once a thriving traveling circus, but in 1965, tragedy struck. A fire broke out during a midnight performance, killing nearly every performer inside. The cause? Unknown. Some say it was an accident. Others believe it was something much worse. Sophie's skin prickled. As she scrolled, a faded black and white photo of the circus performers filled her screen. A lineup of smiling acrobats, clowns, and dancers. But one figure at the center made her stomach twist. A man in a long red coat, his painted grin too wide, his dark eyes hollow. And below the image, a name. Sebastian Grimaldi. Something about his face sent an involuntary shiver through her, like she'd seen him before. Her phone screen flickered for a second, distorting the image. Then the screen shut off. A cold breath whispered against her ear. "You shouldn't have looked," Sophie screamed, dropping the phone. She spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind her, but the room was empty. No, not empty. Her reflection in the mirror wasn't moving. She took a step back. It grinned. Then behind her reflected self, a second figure appeared. Dressed in red, his hollow eyes locked onto her. And before she could even scream, the bedroom light exploded into darkness. Darkness swallowed the room. Sophie's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she fumbled for her phone. The air had turned heavy, thick, like she was breathing through water. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. Not on her bedroom door, not on the window, from inside the mirror. She turned, pulse thundering in her ears. The reflection of her room was barely visible in the dim light, but she wasn't alone. The man in the red coat stood just behind her reflected self, his face half hidden in shadows. His grin never wavered. Sophie's shaking hand reached for the lamp beside her bed. She flicked the switch. Light flooded the room. Her reflection moved normally again. And the man? Gone. She exhaled, chest tightening. Maybe she was losing it. Maybe the research had gotten into her head. That was logical. That made sense. But then, a sound drifted from the mirror. Laughter. Faint at first, then growing, warped and echoing, like a crowd of people laughing from deep inside the glass. Her body turned ice cold. She grabbed the mirror's edges, trying to lift it, to move it out of her room, throw it away, destroy it. Anything. But the moment her fingers touched the frame, the reflection changed. Her bedroom vanished. Instead, she saw a massive, rotting circus tent, its red and white fabric torn and swaying under an unseen wind. Inside, silhouettes twitched and jerked in unnatural ways, their limbs bending too far. And at the center of it all, they stood there watching her, a row of clowns, silent, motionless, smiling. Their faces were wrong. Some had cracked porcelain masks, others had paint smeared across burned skin. Their grins were grotesquely stretched, revealing rows of yellowed teeth. One of them lifted a gloved hand and waved. Then, they all turned their heads toward her. She stumbled back, heart slamming against her ribs. The mirror's surface rippled like liquid glass. The laughter turned to whispers. "Join us." Her reflection reached forward, except it wasn't her anymore. The other Sophie, the one inside the mirror, had a wide, painted grin carved across her lips. "Come inside, Sophie." Her doppelganger's hand shot forward, smashing against the glass. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, and suddenly, the mirror lurched forward, falling. Sophie barely had time to move before it crashed onto the floor, but it didn't shatter. Instead, it lay there, perfectly intact, reflecting something that wasn't her room, something that was still moving. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But then, a soft, cold breath drifted against the back of her neck, and a voice whispered, not from the mirror, but from right behind her. "It's too late." Sophie froze. The breath against her neck was real, cold, damp, unnatural. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to run, to move, to do anything. But fear held her paralyzed. Then, a hand touched her shoulder. She spun around, swinging blindly, but there was nothing there. Nothing, except the mirror. It no longer reflected her bedroom. Instead, it showed a hallway. A dark, endless corridor lined with circus posters peeling off the walls. A path leading deeper inside. Her pulse pounded. She should break the mirror, destroy it, end this nightmare, but something stopped her. From the depths of the mirror, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a shadow, shifting and twisting like smoke. Then, a hand pushed against the glass. Another. A grotesque figure crawled forward, its body jerking like a marionette. One of the clowns. Its porcelain mask was cracked, exposing rotting flesh beneath. Its painted-on smile dripped like melting wax. And then, it spoke. "You brought us back." Sophie stumbled backward, her breath ragged. "No," she whispered. "You're not real." The clown laughed, a sick, distorted sound that rattled her bones. "Not real?" It cocked its head, grinning wider. Then why are you listening? Suddenly, hands burst through the mirror, grabbing at her wrists, her ankles, pulling her toward the glass. Sophie screamed, struggling against their cold, inhuman grip. The laughter from the other side grew louder, shrill and chaotic. Her feet slid forward. The glass rippled like water. They were dragging her inside. Desperate, she kicked, thrashed. Her hands grasped at anything, knocking over a lamp, sending her phone skidding across the floor. Her fingers caught something hard. The antique store receipt. Her mind raced. The old man. He knew. Sophie reached out, clawing for her phone, barely managing to grab it before she was pulled further. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through her call history, dialing the store. Ring. Ring. A voice answered. You need to destroy it. Now. Terror clawed up her throat. How? She gasped, the clown's hands tightening around her wrists. Blood, Sophie. That mirror took lives. It only listens to life. Her pulse pounded. Blood. With all her strength, she wrenched one hand free and grabbed the closest thing she could find, a shard of broken glass from the lamp. Before she could think, she slashed her palm open. Blood dripped onto the mirror's surface. The reaction was immediate. The clown shrieked. The hands released her. The mirror rippled violently, the circus beyond it distorting, fading, collapsing. The laughter turned to screams. Then, silence. Sophie gasped for air, her body trembling. The mirror's surface had returned to normal, reflecting only her wide, terrified eyes. It was over. Or so she thought. Because just before she looked away, the clown's smiling face flickered in the reflection for half a second, and it winked. Sophie staggered back, her breath uneven. That wink. It wasn't an accident. She stared at the mirror, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the reflection remained normal. Her room, her face, her bleeding hand. And yet, deep in her gut, she knew the nightmare wasn't over. The old man's words echoed in her mind. You need to destroy it. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could shatter the mirror once and for all. A hammer. A chair. Then a whisper. You don't want to do that, Sophie. Her blood turned to ice. The voice was behind her. Not from the mirror. She turned, heart hammering, and froze. Standing in the middle of her room was him. Sebastian Grimaldi, the ringmaster, the red coat, the hollow eyes, the painted grin. Except now, he wasn't a photograph. He was real, and he was smiling. You've been such a wonderful audience, he said, tilting his head, but every show must have an ending. Sophie's legs refused to move. She had brought him back. The circus, the clowns, the curse. The mirror wasn't a doorway. It was a stage. And she had given them the final act they needed. Their curtain call. Grimaldi took a slow step forward. Do you know what the best part of a magic trick is, Sophie? He whispered. It's not the trick itself, it's the moment. He snapped his fingers. The lights flickered. The walls changed. Her bedroom melted away. Sophie found herself standing inside the circus tent. The air smelled of burnt popcorn and rot. The audience seats were full, but not with people, clowns, all watching, all grinning, their empty eyes locked onto her. And in the center of it all, waiting for her on the stage, a mirror. But this time the reflection wasn't hers. It was the other Sophie, the one with the painted smile. Grimaldi leaned down beside her, his voice soft, amused. The final act is simple. The audience erupted in laughter. One of you stays. Sophie's reflection stepped forward and reached out, toward her. Sophie screamed. The mirror shattered. 1 week later, the antique store was closed. A going out of business sign hung in the dusty window. Inside, past the empty shelves and discarded relics, one item remained. A mirror. Its golden frame gleamed under the flickering light. The carved face of a clown smiled wider than before. And if you listened closely, from deep inside the glass, you could still hear the sound of laughter. The mirror sat in the empty antique store, its surface smooth, unbroken, waiting. And if you dared to stand too close, if you looked just a little too long, you might see something move, not your reflection, something behind it. And if you listen carefully, you might hear the laughter, but by then it's already too late. The show never really ends. It just waits for its next audience.